What's going on, guys? I'm John Zamora, and today I am going to be reviewing the Canon PowerShot SX740HS. What a name. 740, yes, I got it right. Over the last few years, smartphones have improved tremendously. Here's an example of what a smartphone could do in 2014. And here's an example of what a smartphone can do just 3 years later. Pretty big difference, right? Now, on the other hand, this is an example of the Sony a6000, a camera that was also released in 2014. Compared to the Sony a6100, which was released in November of 2019, a 5-year difference. However, the difference in quality is not quite as big. So because of this, the fact that smartphones are advancing much faster than traditional cameras, smartphones are really encroaching into the world of photography because 1, they're portable. You can take it anywhere. 2, you can pretty much trust a cell phone to properly expose the shot on automatic mode. Being able to properly expose a shot with a camera is no longer a skill that is highly coveted because computers can now do it. Most of them have portrait mode, so you can still get that creamy background, that creamy bokeh. Some of it is computerized, some of it is done optically. And if I had to put a completely unscientific number on how good a smartphone is compared to a traditional mirrorless camera like the one I'm shooting on right now, I would say that smartphones are about 60 to 75% of what a real camera can do. And that's good enough for a lot of people. I don't think that people care as much today as they did 20 years ago about being able to blow up a picture and print it out onto a big old canvas or frame it or anything like that. As long as it's good enough for social media, that's really all some people are looking for. All of these reasons used to be the reason that you would get a point and shoot. But with cell phones getting better and better by the year, who really wants to give up extra pocket space for a camera that can't call people, that can't run apps, over a camera that can? So the big question is, in the year 2020, is it worth it to carry around a point and shoot? I think the answer is still a yes. It's a very limited yes. It's a much more limited yes than it was in years past, but the answer is still yes. And I will tell you why. So first off, let's just go over the definition of a point and shoot camera. A point and shoot camera is a more compact, lightweight version of a traditional camera. And I'm gonna be using the term traditional camera. By traditional, I mean mirrorless cameras or DSLR cameras. Point and shoots have a built-in lens, as you can see. This is not an interchangeable lens. You can't remove it. It's mounted on the camera. This is the only lens that the camera can use.
There can be only one.
It also comes with a built-in flash, an electronic shutter. They have electronic viewfinders, or in this case, just a LCD screen without any kind of viewfinder. They can pretty much be used straight out of the box. You just pull it out of the box, turn it on, and you're ready to snap some decent photos with it, similar to a cell phone. And the final point, and often the most compelling point, is that these point and shoots are more affordable than a traditional camera. The point and shoot can often be the first camera that a budding photographer will buy because it gives you a little bit more control over your photo than a cell phone does. However, it still leaves certain things to to be done automatically that you can manually control in a traditional camera. And if you're coming from the background of shooting with a mirrorless or DSLR camera, not being able to control certain settings with a point and shoot can be extremely frustrating. However, if you're coming from shooting with a cell phone, having the extra control is nice. In my opinion, it's kind of a happy medium. It can teach you certain photography basics, giving you a little bit more control than you had with your cell phone. You can learn how certain factors affect your photo, such as shutter speed, aperture, ISO, but there are still things that it controls automatically so as not to overwhelm you or bombard you with all of the manual controls at once. And for this reason, I think that point and shoot cameras make a great bridge between the cell phone and the traditional camera, where a photographer can test out a point and shoot camera and see if photography is really what they want to do before shelling out a lot more money for a traditional camera. So quick overview, the Canon PowerShot SX740HS was released in August of 2018, not too long ago. It is the 5th camera in the Canon SX700 series, which began all the way back in 2014. It's the first camera to feature Canon's new Digic 8 image processor, as well as the first camera in this series to offer 4K video, although that 4K is significantly cropped, and I will get into that later. It's also capable of shooting 20.3 megapixels, and it has a 40 times optical zoom. So let's talk about the screen. This is a 3-inch color screen. It has about 900,000 pixels. It is not a touch screen, unfortunately. I'm actually not a fan of touch screens in cameras like the Sony a6100, because when I use the viewfinder, my nose touches the screen and then it focuses on a part where I don't want to focus. This would have been nice to have a touch screen on though. Speaking of viewfinders, there is no viewfinder. Cameras that don't have a viewfinder can be a liability in bright light, and I'm sure you've had the experience before of trying to shoot a photo with your cell phone and you just can't really see what you're shooting because the glare is just so bright outside, you have no idea what you're pointing at. Luckily, this screen has been bright enough in pretty much all lighting conditions for me to be able to see the screen easily. It's not a fully articulating screen. This one just has a flip up screen. It flips upward, it does not flip downward. This is the range of motion that the flip screen allows. The dimensions of the camera. This camera is small, it can fit right in my pocket, no problem at all. Here's the specifics to it if anybody's interested. I don't think it's interesting for you to hear me read it off of a piece of paper though. Waste of time. Now let's talk about the zoom. The main advantage that point and shoots have over traditional cameras is the zoom. This is a 40 times zoom. And what does 40 times mean? What you want to know is the focal length. A 10 to 50 millimeter lens, which is technically a 5 times zoom, is completely different from a 20 to 100 millimeter lens, which is also a 5 times zoom. So you want to consider the millimeters. You want to consider the focal length. The focal length equivalent of this point and shoot lens is 24 millimeter to 960 millimeters in this tiny package. To put that in perspective, this giant lens, and look at the size of this thing, just the lens, fully extended with the lens hood. Look at that. This extends all the way to 960 millimeters. This only extends to 210 millimeters. This will not fit in your pocket. So of course a lens like this is gonna have far superior image quality, but as I said, you can't fit this in your pocket if you don't have space in your bag. Then that is where the point and shoot comes into play. Using this for travel or just having it on you at all times for any spontaneous event that might come up that you want to capture. That is why you have this camera, not because it has amazing image quality. In terms of vlogging, 24 millimeters, as you can see here, it works. It works for vlogging. It's wide enough. However, in 4K, you have a crop factor. That is not as good. Just not quite wide enough. For B-roll, for anything that's further away than your own face, it's fine, but for vlogging it's just a little bit too tight, so I usually shoot in 1080. This Canon point and shoot comes with optical image stabilization. It works really well on the wider shots, the walk and talk shot of vlogging it is great at. However, when you're starting to zoom really far in, then it just starts getting shaky and there's only so much that the optical image stabilization can do. For that reason, I think that it is far better suited for stills, just as with any camera with OIS. It's more effective at still photos because then you can slow down your shutter speed a little bit. You can lower your ISO a little bit. You can close your aperture a little bit further. With that optical image stabilization, it gives you a few more steps of freedom. It also comes with a zoom framing assistant. And what in the world is a zoom framing assistant? I'll tell you what a zoom framing assistant is. So if you're zoomed in really far, maybe you're trying to take photos of wildlife, maybe you're recording a sporting event, and you just completely lose your subject, you can hold down the zoom framing assistant. It will back out for just a second for you to find your subject, and then when you release the button, then it'll zoom back into your subject, the same focal length that it was before you pushed it. I haven't really used it too much just because I haven't shot wildlife or sports with this too often. It does zoom out and back in more quickly and more reliably than manually zooming in and out yourself, so it is kind of handy to have. I personally don't use it a whole lot. With a camera with such a telephoto zoom, a lot of people are going to buy this camera just for that zoom, and so that zoom framing assistant will be useful if you are going to be using this zoom consistently. The focus. The Canon point and shoot uses TTL autofocus, which means through the lens autofocus. So how does this work? The camera has a beam splitter inside of it, which splits light into two different light sensors. By the camera knowing the distance between the two light sensors, the angle towards the subject, the Canon can calculate the distance from the camera to the subject and accordingly adjust the focus to that subject. So we all remember SOHCAHTOA from trigonometry class, and I guess it does pay to pay attention in trigonometry. Pay attention in your trig classes, kids. It also has facial recognition, which you can tell if it's, am I in there? Yes, I am. Maybe. Okay, well, hopefully it's working. A box is supposed to come up around your face to let you know that the camera has recognized that there is a face in the frame, and it will prioritize focus on that face over anything else in the frame. So that's pretty handy to have, especially as a vlogger. And finally, the minimum focus distance is just 1 centimeter or 0.4 inches on macro mode only. Now let's talk about the lens. So the aperture works kind of weird on this lens. It works kind of the same on zoom lenses on traditional cameras that aren't super expensive. The maximum aperture of this lens is f3.3, but that is only at 24 millimeters. As soon as you start zooming, that aperture drops. And when you're fully extended, that maximum aperture drops from f3.3 to f6.9. Not only that, the minimum aperture is only f8.0, not too small, but that's the minimum aperture. So your range of aperture is from f3.3 to f8.0. If you're zoomed in all the way, that aperture changes from f6.9 to f8.0. Not great. Not great. Keep in mind though that this is literally called a point and shoot camera, where you just point, you make sure your subject is in the frame, and you shoot, and that is it. You can't do the artistic things that you can with a traditional camera. You point and you shoot. The shutter speeds can go anywhere from 1/3200th of a second all the way to 15 seconds. You cannot control the shutter speed in video though. Big time bummer. Big time bummer. Also, the range of ISO is from 100 to 3200 ISO. The shooting modes. The shooting modes on this Canon point and shoot include manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, automatic, program where you can set a preset, hybrid automatic, food, selfie, scene selection, and video. And that makes me so sad to have a camera in which it has all of these modes, and then one single tiny mode encompasses all of video. that sucks. So let's talk about stills. I know I'm a video guy. I do still take stills. It's not my specialty, not the thing that I love to do, but it is a camera and cameras take stills. Let's talk about stills. This little guy's got 20.3 effective megapixels, but just as I prefer to look at focal length over magnification times, I prefer to look at sensor size over megapixels. So megapixels are a measure of how many different pixels the sensor is divided into. So 20.3 megapixels on a smaller sensor is going to come out with a completely different image than 20.3 megapixels on a full-size sensor. So dividing a small sensor into tiny pixels, it might look good on the stat sheet, but small pixels can't really hold much information and it doesn't really make the image that much better, which is getting kind of tricky now because you're seeing cell phones with 60 megapixels, 100 megapixel camera, but their sensor is tiny. It doesn't matter how many times you divide that sensor, it is still tiny. So the sensor size of this guy is 1/2 inch. To put that in perspective, it's a little bit bigger than a cell phone, a little bit smaller than my Sony mirrorless crop sensor, which is a little bit smaller than a full frame camera. For stills, it does have continuous shooting in 2 different modes. The first mode can shoot in 10 frames per second and it is one-shot autofocus. I don't understand this mode. If you're shooting continuously, the camera should be focusing continuously. The one-shot mode, it focuses for the very first shot, then you hold down the shutter and it continues to shoot at 10 frames per second, but it maintains that same focus that you had for the first shot. And the reason you would shoot continuous shots is because your subject is moving and you're just using the shotgun technique and hoping that a few of those frames will look cool, that you catch them at the right time during their movement. If your subject is not moving, then there's no need for you to shoot continuously. The better option of this is the servo autofocus, where it focuses each individual shot that it takes. This can shoot at 7.4 frames per second, which is much slower than 10. But what's the point of shooting 10 frames per second if all of your shots are out of focus except for your first one? The servo autofocus is more useful in a continuous burst shooting situation. And I personally think that they just did the single shot autofocus so that they can boast about their 10 frames per second continuous shooting on this camera. It can shoot 10 frames per second, yes, but all of the photos will be out of focus if your subject is moving at all. This guy does not shoot in RAW. I wouldn't expect a point and shoot to shoot in RAW. However, if you are used to shooting in RAW, you don't have that option with this guy. JPEGs are good if you're just shooting the photo to put it up on Instagram, do like maybe little tweaks, little minimal edits, and just put up a cool, decent picture, then this is perfect for you. So the difference between JPEG and RAW is that RAW, you're given a much bigger file size and you are tasked with making all of the little tweaks to make sure that photo looks nice. With JPEG, the computer inside of the camera makes a lot of those tweaks for you. And sometimes you agree with those tweaks and sometimes you don't. Luckily with Canon, they are very well known for their color science, and I think you're gonna be happy with the tweaks that this camera chooses to make on its photos 90% of the time. So that's it with the lens. The biggest drawback I would say of the lens is the aperture. You're not gonna get that really creamy bokeh behind you, which is not to be expected for most point and shoots. Maybe the high-end point and shoots would be able to do that. Now for the video portion, my favorite portion. So this can shoot in 4K video at 30 frames per second with a crop factor. It doesn't really show you the focal length of the lens when you're zooming in or out, so I can't really tell you what that zoom is equivalent to. My best guess would be, maybe 32 millimeters equivalent with that crop factor in 4K. It's not great. It's not great. I don't even shoot in 4K when I'm vlogging because I prefer the 60 frames per second so that I can slow it down to half speed if I want to. So it can shoot 1080p in 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. It can shoot also in 720p in 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. Why you would shoot in 720p? I don't know why you'd shoot in 720p. Maybe you only have a 8 megabyte memory card. It can shoot in 780, 720p if you really just love 720p. That brings up the point that this does not shoot in 24 frames per second, which is a big time bummer for a lot of people. Personally, I actually shoot my videos in 30 frames per second, either 30, 60, 120, but I export it in 30 frames per second. I just like 30 frames per second. I like how it looks. I like that 30 frames per second is more universal than 24. But if you're only shooting 24, this one can't shoot 24. Also with the video, there is no external mic port anywhere on this camera. So you are stuck with the onboard mic, which is decent. It's not directional whatsoever, and it is on the very top of the camera right here. So that when you're holding it, you know, depending on how you're holding it, you might be blocking the microphone. So you do have to be mindful of that microphone. It is also super susceptible to wind. Any slight breeze will get caught by the microphone. So taking video outside is really tough if you need that audio. I usually flip up the screen, and the screen actually does a pretty good job of shielding the microphone from the wind. However, if you're trying to keep the back of the camera to the wind, you're kind of at bay as far as lighting goes, and you will get some backlit shots. There'll be weird situations where you have to decide between having windy audio or having a backlit shot. That's not ideal. There are tiny windscreens. They're just like stickers that you can stick on little microphones like this or GoPro microphones, and people swear by it. I haven't used it, but that is an option for you. So overall, my experience shooting with this camera in video, it works. It's better than a cell phone, but everything is automatic. As I said before, it's just one single mode for all of video. So you flip it to the video mode, you turn it on, you can't adjust anything. You can't adjust the aperture, you can't adjust the shutter speed. I think you can adjust the ISO. No, you cannot even do that. So you're pretty much just stuck with whatever the camera thinks are good video settings. It doesn't come with an ND filter built in, so your video is not going to be super silky smooth or anything like that, but it's better than cell phone quality, which is what you're looking for if you're buying a point and shoot. So if you have paying clients, do not use this camera for their video. Do not use this camera for their photos. This camera is for you, for all the fun stuff that you want to do, all the videos that you're taking for yourself. If you have paying clients, don't use this camera. So now let's talk about vlogging specifics. This camera, specifically in vlogging terms, how does it stack up? First, let's talk about the OIS. The OIS is pretty great actually. I really enjoy the optical image stabilization. So much better than Sony's. I love Sony's. I hate their optical image stabilization. They say that they have it, but I swear there is just like, maybe it reduces like 10% of the shakes, but it is just awful. This guy, however, is great stabilization. Canon, you got that going for you. The zoom is everything for the vlogging. You can have a focal length anywhere from 24 all the way up to 960. And like I said before, you can't carry this around in your pocket. So being able to have this in your pocket, take it anywhere with you, record anything, which is the name of the game when it comes to vlogging, this guy can do it. And the versatility is just, it's awesome. I love that about this camera. So, yes, the microphone is not great. No, the image quality is not just gonna blow somebody out of the water, but it's versatile, it's portable, and it is more affordable than a traditional camera. Those are all pillars of vlogging. I do think that the microphone being not that great is just, and there's no option for any different type of audio unless you want to, you know, record your audio separately and then sync it together with your video. I just really hate doing that. If that's your thing, then congratulations. So final thoughts on the Canon PowerShot SX740HS. Will this camera outperform a traditional camera? Absolutely not. However, will it perform cell phones, action cameras, and other point and shoot cameras in its class? I think the answer to that is actually yes. This is the first point and shoot that I've purchased since I was in 3rd grade, which is when I bought my very first camera. I was so excited about. By the way, that was also a Sony. And the reason I went so long without a point and shoot is that cell phone photography and videography has been getting so much better, and I just never really saw a reason to buy another camera when a cell phone fits in my pocket just fine and the videos are just fine. The real reason I bought this was I found a pretty good open box deal and decided to take the leap for it at full price. Right now it's currently retailing at $400 US. I don't think that it's worth $400 US. For $400 US you can get a Sony a6000 used, and that is way better image quality than this guy. Not quite as versatile, but much better, just a way better camera. Get the a6000 if you're gonna spend $400. But if you can find this guy on a sale, or if you cannot find an acceptable quality a6000, because yes, used you can get it for $400 or lower, but new, I think you're looking at maybe $600 still. And if that's the case, this camera becomes an interesting choice for $200 less. So if you're just looking to take fun videos, if you're a vlogger, if you already have a mirrorless or DSLR camera and you're just looking for a little portable camera to take with you on your trips, on your family outings, then this is a pretty great camera. It is a great sidekick. You can just stuff it into your pocket, not really worry. It's pretty robust. I've been jamming it into my pocket pretty much every day, and it does fine in there. It outperforms cell phones in almost all situations. It doesn't take up too much real estate in your pocket. I would recommend the Canon SX740HS point and shoot camera if you can find a good deal on it. So that's it for the review. I hope that it was useful as usual. Let me know in the comments anything that you still want me to answer, because I know I can't go through every single thing about this product in this short video. Thank you for watching. If this video was helpful for you, please consider subscribing. Please consider hitting that like button, and I will see you next time. I'm too nervous to touch the lens. See you guys next time.